So welcome to this amazing tutorial in which we are going to see how we make an installation of ArgoCD, and at the same time we are going to learn how GitOps works and what is GitOps. So let's start. I think the first interesting thing that we are going to do is to just see an schema of the typical GitOps pipeline that we would have. So let's go to this other secondary view, and let's have a look here to one schema to see with an example how a GitOps pipeline works indeed. So typically we have here the developers who are developing, let's say, a React application that it could be, and they are doing their changes locally. And what happens is typically that once they have tested locally their changes, they want to test that into some server and see if it's working. What will they do is to make a git push. In this case, we are using a GitLab repository. And in the GitLab repository, we will have everything that has to do with the React application. For convenience, we also will have in the same repository everything that has to do with the APIs related to that React application. In our case, we are using Node.js. And at the same time, we are also going to save in the same repository everything that has to do with the infrastructure. So this is the key part of the GitOps. And we are also going to save everything that has to do with the CI/CD pipeline, let's say with the automation. So what happens once we make the git push in the GitLab repository is that, for example, we are going to have the typical CI tool, in this case Jenkins, because it is free and it has a great deal of plugins that they work pretty well. What we are going to do here is to just use one of the Jenkins agents. We are going to use a Docker agent, and we are going to specify that this agent is going to use a Docker image. So for this example, I have just created a Docker image that's including a scaffold installation and a customized installation. So with this, we will be able to run scaffold and customize, which will enable to automatize the process of creating the Docker image, and also everything that has to do in relation to generating all the Kubernetes files. So once the Jenkins detects that there is a change in GitLab repository, via webhook, it will start to do all the stages that are required to compile the code and to generate the Docker images and all the modifications in the infrastructure. This can be done in an automatized way, let's say using a webhook, but it also can be manual to begin with. So here it comes another important part of the pipeline, which is the scaffold. In this case, the scaffold is a tool provided by Google, which is free, and it basically allows to automatize everything that has to do with building images for different environments. So let's say we have our React application and we want to make some compilation for a development environment, for a staging environment, for a production environment, and so on. So this scaffold will automatize as I said how to create these images, and then these images will be uploaded to a Docker registry. Finally, this scaffold will also create the YAMLs, which will contain the resources for our Kubernetes cluster. Remember that for this example, we are just using K3s, which is a very easy way to bootstrap a Kubernetes cluster without needing the complications of using a kubeadmin or just Kubernetes the hard way or all that stuff. We are just going to bootstrap a Kubernetes cluster with a single command. So here after this scaffold has made all the compilation, this is what typically we would see in any other pipeline until now, let's say. From here is where the magic happens. So by the time the scaffold has generated these resources that are all the resources that will be deployed in the Kubernetes cluster. This is done by putting all those resources in a YAML file. Then these resources will end up, or this file, this YAML file, will end up in the GitLab repository. So here we are just hitting a couple of times the GitLab. So this first time is the typical way to hit a Git repository, which is uploading all the files, all the changes from the source code. And here, after we have generated all the required Docker images, we are just going to upload all the infrastructure that the Kubernetes cluster will need. In this case, in the majority of the times, it will just be that the pods that specify things related to the applications. In this case, their image codes or their image IDs will be different because they will correspond to a different compilation. So once these images are specified in the pods, we will have here our ArgoCD, which will be the application that we are going to explain with more detail in this video today. This ArgoCD will detect that there is a change in the infrastructure and will pull via webhook the file that is containing all these modifications and will do all that is required to synchronize with the K3s cluster. So this is basically the complete pipeline. Let's say there's a final stage, which is the typical one that is not depending on the ArgoCD or anything else. That is when the K3s cluster, in this case, it is going to download all the images required that are specified for all the containers of the pods. It will access to the registry of Docker in this case. So for this is important that we have enabled this connection also, so the Kubernetes cluster is also able to download all the images. So with this, now you have a good introduction of how GitOps works and what is GitOps. Basically, it is more related to this last stage of the pipeline in which things related to the infrastructure are automatized. So with this, we are going to have our demo here. So let's start. We are going to go for the terminal. So yes, in this case, the first thing would be to have our Kubernetes clusters, as we have here on the left in the terminal. We can see that there were some pods here running. So the first thing that we are going to do is to install ArgoCD in the same Kubernetes cluster that we are going to run the rest of the applications. So for this, we can run this command from here. In this case, the command was already run, so it is not required to run it again. And the first thing that we are going to do is to retrieve the password of ArgoCD installation with this command from here. Once we have it, we are going to go to the first there's a need of another step. which is to basically change the cluster API port that the ArgoCD server by default has to a node port. So for this, it is enough to go here to the pods, and we will see that there is an ArgoCD server pod that it is the server of ArgoCD. In this case, it would be the controller, but we want to change the service. So for this, we would do kubectl edit and service. We are going to use the abbreviation here, and -n, which is the namespace, is equals to ArgoCD. So here we are. We have the specification of the service, and here we can see the ports that this server is using. So for this, we see that these are the ports, and we see that there's a webhook and there's a metrics port, but what we want to see is that there has to be a node port. And here we see how we specified that one of the types of the ports is a node port. And we can see here what's the port of ArgoCD. If we go here to the ArgoCD installation and we see the port from here, we have to see that it has to be equivalent. So in this case, it is not the equivalent. For this, we are going to retrieve all the services for ArgoCD. And for this, we are going to specify the namespace of ArgoCD. And here we can see how this 32,000 port, it is the server indeed. So if we go back again to the service and we find the port, which is 32,345, we are going to see how the change was already done in the past. So in this case, the port 80, it is going to be mapped to be a node port. So with this, we have the ArgoCD configured, so we can access it locally. So for this, we are going to just access. Remember that the password was retrieved with the former command. And here we have the user interface of ArgoCD. So as you can see, it is pretty simple. And from here, what we are going to do, the next thing that we are going to do is to deploy an application. In ArgoCD, the way to deploy or to specify all the let's say the set of YAMLs that is composing like a web application or a mobile application or any other building or setup that we want to deploy is through an ArgoCD application. For this, we can see here an application that is written in YAML. So basically, this application can be done in a couple of ways. We can just specify it in the web UI, like new app, and here we would specify the name of the project, and then we would specify the repository URL, in this case, for example, and inside of the repository, the path in which all the files are located, and so on. But in this case, we are going to do it with the YAML file. And as you will see here in the YAML file, we can see that we specify as if it was a Kubernetes resource, the application, and we define the name, we define the namespace, which is ArgoCD in this case. And here we specify let's say the destination of the setup, which is going to be our Kubernetes cluster. And then we also specify the repo URL with this string. And then the path. And the path is where all the resources that we are building at the stage of launching the scaffold. So let's say that the output of the scaffold is going to be a file that it is going to be located in this path. Remember that this is like the second hit that we make to our GitLab repository. So with this, we are going to deploy this application, and we are going to do it with this simple command with kubectl apply and the application. So we are going to do here the command, and we are going to go to the ArgoCD web UI, and you will see that the moment that I execute this command, we are going to automatically have here the application in ArgoCD web application, web user interface. With this, if we enter here, we are going to see that ArgoCD is detecting that the scaffold output just rendered some resources for the Kubernetes cluster, which is, yes, a namespace, a service, a deployment, and an ingress. Just as a curiosity, we can go to our code and see how scaffold generated this rendering. So here we can see on the right what the scaffold output generated. It was a namespace, a service, as we have seen, a deployment, and an ingress. And here on the left, we can just see again the ArgoCD application. So let's go back to our tutorial. And here we can see that ArgoCD has detected all the resources, but it hasn't deployed anything yet. So to deploy the resources, we are going to press here on the sync button. And here we'll specify the way we want to ArgoCD is going to deploy things, to synchronize things. Sorry. Here we see that we can select what of the YAML files are going to be synchronized. In this case, we are going to do it very simple, and we are going to choose the default values. So let's synchronize all the setup, all the application, and we are going to start to see that the synchronization is okay. And we are seeing here that the deployment is creating a replication set, and this replication set is basically consisting of one pod. And if we go back here to our terminal and we just test if the pod is generated, let's check it. So kubectl get pod, and for example, in all the namespaces, we are going to see that the pod is running now. It only has taken like, well, it has been running from for 40 seconds only, and the pod is already running. Here it is very interesting to see also that through the ArgoCD, we can also go to the website that we would have been deployed now. So if we go to the ingress, you can see here ing, which comes from ingress. If we just make click to the link, the website that we have generated will open. So voila, here we can see that we have made our first GitOps pipeline, and in the end, automatically all what is required to run the application has been set up. So with this, I would like to thank your attention. And stay tuned, please, for the next videos in which I will explain how the other steps from the pipeline are working. You remember, we had this scaffold step, which was, and it is very important. And we also have this Jenkins step, which is responsible of making all the Git pull and the Git push again to make this second hit in GitLab. So stay tuned and keep in touch. See you guys. Bye.